Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time you happen to be watching this. I hope you're having a good day, and I hope that the wintry mix over the weekend didn't cause you too many problems. Today, we're going to apply one of Green's essays to the definition essay you're working on. We're going to take a look at some of the things he did that I hope will prove helpful to you. As always, the quick disclaimer: all borrowed images and quoted text are used for educational purposes. I am just a person trying to help my students in my class. I am not a professional YouTuber. One of the things he does very, very well in this first slide is he gives a description of the term, then he contrasts it, and then sort of repeats everything with a negative, and then he tries to tie it back in to a sense of place. And one of the things I think is important as you write is to help your readers capture the feeling of the sense of place. So, the first description: precipitation will shift from sleet to snow to rain, and then back to sleet, and then back to snow, and then back to rain. And then you will get these weird tiny pellets. And then we contrast what snow does. It's beautiful, ridiculously picturesque as it wafts down and blankets the ground. Wintry mix is radically unromantic. The word, the sound of the word, gives you the feel of it. It's the same thing we came across with the word yips. You could feel the muscles tense as you use the word yip. And you just growl, it's like gravel and it's growling and it's terrible. And then he talks about it fits the practical, unlovely, and unpretentious. The Midwestern aesthetic, for lack of a better word. The next thing he does exceptionally well, I think, is ties what he did to other writers who are more famous. And he puts that in context, giving us this idea of, we all want to ascribe human emotions to non humans. And we want to kind of get our inner life out into the world. And so, whether it was Keats talking about a weeping cloud, or William Shakespeare and Julius Caesar talking about threatening clouds, or being lonely as a cloud, or if clouds are angry or mean or curious. All of those things are qualities that we have, and we want to express those qualities. And remember, please, please, I'm begging you, remember, it's not enough just to define the term. What's the point of defining the term? What's the bigger picture you want to paint in your essay? What about all of the terms you have the option to define? Whether it's happiness, whether it's delicious, whether it's student athlete, whatever it is, what are those terms? What point do you want to make with the definition of those terms? And then explain why the quotations matter. We had the Emily Dickinson reference on the previous slide. He gives a practical, and if I can want to be sarcastic, Midwestern definition here. And then he goes on and talks about the idea that it's context dependent. If it's really sunny, I want the clouds. If it's cold and windy, I don't want very many clouds because it's going to make it feel colder. And it's going to give me the idea that A lot of clouds on a cold day and a windy day make me worry about a blizzard. It's context dependent. And I think you have to give your context, whether it's a geographical context like the Midwest, or whether it's a, you know, emotional context, whatever it is, you have to provide some context. Why does this all matter? We've finished the comparison and contrast essays. And I think it's important to think about using other modes of development within your essay. And here there's this comparison or this contrast of the literary terms with the analogies, giving us a little more depth. So please, your last essay, the comparison and contrast essay, used a lot of the uh, elements of a narrative. Here, think about, are there things that you need to summarize a little bit? Are there things you need to compare? Are there things you need to contrast as you do your definition? Have a twist. He uses the idea of this is not a bug of human consciousness, but a feature. The whole idea of it's a feature, not a bug, is part of the 2020s phrasing. And he gives us this idea that the weather, of course, doesn't have human emotions, it causes them. And then he's really pushing hard to get to the point we see the world around us in the context of ourselves. Brings it back to the context dependent of a couple slides earlier. And he brings it back to the emotional level that we've talked about, that he's talked about throughout this presentation. Almost all the quotations that have been up in these slides have been about emotional selves. And then he does the twist. It's not a bug, it's a feature. It's the good thing. He gets sarcastic. And here I think it's my job to remind you that sarcasm doesn't work unless the audience is ready for it, unless you set it up, and that it's much easier to be sarcastic in person than it is on the printed page. Quite frankly, on the printed page, frequently sarcasm goes undetected. And like the meme, even if you're willing to give it away for free. So please, please be careful about the sarcasm. He uses it to develop the point that, the weather's indifferent to us, but it still causes our emotions. Please be careful about that. He does several things to make Wintry Mix and his definition of Wintry Mix matter. It lets him know he's home. That's an emotional thing. It's part of the whole context of the emotions. Being home is an emotional thing. And then he goes deep. He goes deeper and he goes from himself personally, feeling at home, to going a step further. We know that we're sprinkling little meaning dust everywhere, according to Green. And he gives a whole list of things that may or may not mean something. And then he goes and does one of his little twists again. Making meaning isn't a choice. The kind of meaning can be. That's a deep point. We get to choose the kind of meaning we create. And I think Green, for talking about groundhogs and mountains meaning God and building meaning, really buries a big point underneath all of the text. So I would urge you not to overdo all of the examples if it's going to bury the big point. Making meaning isn't a choice. The kind of meaning we make can be. It's a deep point that ties back to the definition, that ties back to the context, that urges us to create our own context. And then he goes a little bit further. He gives us the point of view, and he wraps it up with a contrast of what he said at the very beginning. Wintry Mix isn't beautiful at the beginning. It's unpretentious, but it's certainly not beautiful. However, for this one night, because he was capable of making his own meaning, it's beautiful. As you're writing your essay, what big point do you want to make? How does the definition help you make that point? And can you do it in layers so that you're not jumping from point, you're not jumping into something and asking your reader to take a leap of faith. But if you do it in layers and you peel back the outer skin, and you peel back a second skin, and you peel back a third skin, context started it. Building meaning was next. Choosing the meaning not choosing how we do the meaning, and then the effect of that. 4 steps. I think that he didn't jump into the last thing. He led us by the hand through 4 steps. And think about, can you do that as well as you're writing? I think I'll wrap this one up here. We're going to have some deeper discussions, that's the wrong word. We're going to have some other discussions in class, defining some terms that Green has in this presentation and talking through a few other things. Hope to see everybody in class next class period.